The storm did not come from the sky. It rose from the earth, an eruption of red dust, cracking stone, and screams swallowed by the roar of something older than time itself. In that final hour of the forgotten kingdom of Aranik, as its temples collapsed and its priests clawed at the ground like frantic animals, one artifact was born from chaos, a diamond so perfectly clear that it seemed to contain within it a window to another world. Those who were present would later insist it glowed from the inside, as if lit by the trapped soul of a dying god. Before we begin, welcome to a journey through shadows, myths, and empires lost to greed. If you enjoy dark history and cursed relics, please consider subscribing. Your support helps bring these stories to life. Now, if you're ready to step into the ancient past, let us descend into the ruins where the curse first awakened. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. The fall of Aranik began long before the diamond appeared, long before the streets filled with smoke and the palace pillars cracked like old bones. It began with fear. Fear of a prophecy, fear of a war they could not win, fear that the gods they worshipped had abandoned them. The kingdom had once been a jewel of the desert, its vast irrigation canals feeding emerald fields, its scholars renowned for mapping the stars, its rulers seen as divine vessels. But within one generation, it had withered into a place where starving families burned their own furniture for warmth, and nobles whispered of omens in the night sky. At the center of this unraveling was High Priest Eshmuntal, a man whose face was always half hidden beneath a hooded veil of bone-white linen. His voice was low and calm, but his eyes betrayed a storm of ambitions he never dared speak aloud. Eshmuntal believed the gods had not abandoned Aranik. Rather, they demanded a sacrifice so extraordinary, so unthinkable, that only then would they intervene. He spoke of it only to the king, whispering in the midnight hours while the torches flickered like dying souls. The king, Izaran II, was no tyrant. He had inherited a kingdom already dying, and the weight of it pressed upon him until his shoulders bent like those of an old man. When Eshmuntal insisted salvation lay in an ancient forbidden ritual, Izaran resisted at first. But famine had grown teeth. Rebels had set fire to the southern granaries. The outer provinces murmured of rebellion. With each passing day, Izaran's hope dwindled, until one night, after dreaming of a black sun rising over his throne, he summoned Eshmuntal and told him to proceed with whatever sacrifice was needed. The ritual was to be performed deep beneath the Temple of the First Dawn, in a cavern sealed for 600 years. Its entrance was marked with warnings carved in dead languages, warnings the priests scraped away in silence. Those who descended into the darkness carried with them fear, but also a dangerous faith, the belief that Aranik could still be saved. The cavern smelled of sulfur and wet stone. In the center lay an altar carved from obsidian, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly when touched. Eshmuntal approached it with the reverence of a man greeting death itself. On the altar lay the heart vessel, a smooth, polished sphere of volcanic glass said to hold the tears of the earth. According to legend, when filled with the blood of a righteous king, it could draw forth divine intervention, or disaster. Izoran stepped forward, placing his hand atop the sphere. In that moment, he realized the truth. Eshmuntal had misled him. The ritual did not require the king's blood. It required the king. Before he could react, chains snapped around his wrists. The priests, those he had trusted his entire life, pulled him to the altar and bound him in place. Eshmuntal began chanting, his voice echoing through the chamber as if accompanied by a chorus of invisible spirits. The runes flared brighter, casting eerie reflections across the cavern walls. Ijorin screamed, not in fear, but in betrayal. The priests trembled, but they did not stop. They believed this was their final chance at salvation. They believed the gods would reward them. They believed the sacrifice of a single king could save millions. They were wrong. When the obsidian blade pierced the king's chest, the world trembled. The sphere cracked. A fissure opened beneath the altar, spilling blinding light as hot as sunfire. The priests stumbled backward, shielding their eyes, but Eshmuntal did not stop. He continued chanting, even as his skin blistered, and the cavern filled with a sound like the wail of 1,000 tormented spirits. Then the light collapsed inward, condensing into a single point on the altar. When it faded, the priest saw a gem, smooth, flawless, shimmering as if its surface held the reflections of destinies not yet written. Eshmuntal approached it with trembling hands. The gem pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The high priest smiled, and then the cavern collapsed. Pillars of ancient stone split apart. Sand poured in from ruptured tunnels. The priests died screaming, crushed or burned or swallowed whole by the earth. Eshmuntal himself survived only long enough to crawl toward the dying light of the surface, the diamond clutched against his chest. He emerged into a world already on fire. The city above had erupted with earthquakes and lightning storms. Buildings crumbled. The palace dome split open like an egg. And through it all, the diamond glowed faintly, as though feeding on the destruction.
Eshmuntal died on the steps of the ruined temple, his last breath a whisper carried away by the wind. Forgive me. No one ever learned what he had attempted to do. No surviving record explained the ritual he performed. All that remained of Aranik were its ashes, and the diamond, discovered days later by scavengers who had no idea what they held in their hands. They called it the Tear of the Desert. Historians would later rename it something far darker, the cursed diamond that destroyed empires. But at that moment, as it passed from one careless hand to another, no one realized the truth. The diamond was no mere gemstone. It was a wound in reality, a vessel of pain, a silent predator shaped from suffering. And it was hungry. They found the diamond in the pocket of a dead man. His body lay half buried in sand at the edge of the ruined city, one arm reaching out as if he had been crawling toward the distant hills when death overtook him. Sun and wind had already begun their work. The skin was cracked, the eyes dry and glassy. The scavengers who discovered him were not mourners or rescuers. They were opportunists, picking through the bones of Aranik to see what could still be sold. They rolled his body over with the casual detachment of those who have seen too many corpses. A faint clink sounded, the noise of stone against metal. One of them, a boy with calloused fingers and dust caked beneath his nails, slid his hand into the dead man's tattered robe and closed it around something small and cold. When he drew it out, the others fell silent. In his palm lay a diamond, but unlike any they had seen in the bazaars of lesser kingdoms, it did not merely reflect the sun. It seemed to drink it in, turning light into something sharper, more focused. Beneath its surface, delicate fractures formed patterns that almost resembled script, the suggestion of symbols that shifted whenever one tried to fix them in mind. For an instant, each scavenger thought they saw their own reflection in it, not as they were, but as they might be, richer, powerful, feared. No one spoke, but greed threaded the air between them like smoke. The boy closed his fingers around the gem and slipped it into a leather pouch at his belt. They stripped the corpse of anything else of value and moved on, never knowing that the diamond had already begun to work on them. It was subtle at first, a sense of possession, a jealousy that flared into anger when another's hand strayed too close to the boy's pouch, an odd prickle at the back of the neck when strangers stared for too long. They argued more that night around the campfire, snapping at one another over trivial things, and though they usually slept huddled together for warmth, each chose a separate patch of ground.
By the time they reached the borders of the Empire of Narezh 3 days later, 2 of the scavengers were dead. One from a knife in the dark, the other from a fall that no one saw but everyone secretly believed had been helped along by another's shove. The boy, whose name was Terran, arrived alone at the outpost market, eyes hollow, but fingers still tightly wrapped around his pouch. Narezh was an empire on the rise. Its banners, dyed with crimson and gold, fluttered from every tower. Its soldiers marched in fresh armor, helmets bright and polished. Its markets thrummed with the noise of traders who believed the future belonged to this burgeoning power. At its heart stood Emperor Adrast, a man whose ambition stretched further than his borders. He had risen from a minor warlord to a ruler of nations in the span of a decade, carving his path through a line of enemies who had underestimated his patience and his cruelty. Terran did not know any of this. He knew only that he was hungry, exhausted, and in possession of something that might feed him for the remainder of his life if he could avoid being killed for it. He approached Jeweler first, a narrow-eyed woman whose stall showcased rings and bracelets glittering beneath a canopy of dyed cloth. When he opened his hand and let the diamond catch the light, she stiffened. Her fingers twitched, reaching out, then stopped. Something in the stone troubled her. Its perfection felt unnatural, as if it had not been born of earth and time, but of something more deliberate, more cruel. She offered him far less than its value, hoping fear and ignorance would compel him to accept. Terran, despite his youth, sensed the deception. He left her stall with the stone still in his possession and walked deeper into the city, the gem a weight that seemed to grow heavier with every step. Word traveled fast in the Rej. By nightfall, whispers of a boy with a cursed bright jewel had slipped through taverns and barracks, carried on the tongues of merchants and gamblers. Some laughed it off as rumor, others felt a flicker of interest, but it was when the rumor reached the ears of a minor court official, ambitious, anxious, and desperate for a way to catch the Emperor's attention, that the diamond's path shifted toward destiny. The official's name was Kadrin. He found Terran in a cheap inn near the southern gate, where the boy huddled over a bowl of thin stew, his pouch clutched in his lap. Kadrin sat across from him and spoke in a soft, steady voice. He did not pretend ignorance. He spoke of value, of safety, of the dangers of keeping something so precious in a place where men killed for a handful of copper. Terran, worn down by days of suspicion and solitude, agreed to show him the gem. When Kadrin saw it, his breath hitched. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard something, like distant chanting trapped in the facets, a murmur at the edge of hearing. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only his own reflection staring back at him, but changed, dressed in silks, standing close to the Emperor's throne. He offered Terran a sum that made the boy's head spin. It was still far less than what the diamond was worth, but Terran had never seen so much gold in one place. Hunger, fear, and the dream of never scavenging another corpse did the rest. The deal was struck. That night, as Kadrin walked toward the inner city with the diamond hidden beneath his cloak, the first cracks in Narezh's future quietly opened. At court, Kadrin's presentation of the diamond caused a ripple of awe.
The emperor's advisors leaned in, their expressions tight with envy and curiosity. Adrast himself, draped in a robe stitched with the symbols of conquered tribes, took the gem in his hand and held it up to the torchlight. It seemed to like him. For the briefest moment, Adrast felt heat radiate from it, as if he held a living heart. Visions flared in his mind, armies kneeling, cities offering tribute, rival banners torn and burning. He saw his empire stretching to the horizon, unchallenged and eternal. The feeling vanished as quickly as it had arrived, but it left behind a hunger greater than any he had known. He named the diamond the Eye of Dominion and decreed it mounted in a circlet of gold to be worn at his brow during councils of war. From that day, the course of Narezh altered. Battles that had once seemed unlikely victories began to fall easily into Adrast's grasp. His generals marched with renewed confidence. The enemies who had held out for years suddenly found themselves beset by bad fortune. Plague in their camps, storms wrecking their supply lines, mutiny among their soldiers. To those who believed in omens, it seemed the diamond favored Narezh, tilting the balance of fate. But the blessings came with a cost that was paid in subtler coin. Adrast's sleep grew restless. He woke often at night, convinced he heard footsteps beyond his chamber, whispers behind the walls, the rustle of daggers drawn in the dark. He began to suspect his generals of plotting against him, his advisors of withholding information, his own family of ambition. The more success he tasted, the more fiercely he clung to his power, and the more violently he reacted to the phantom threats conjured by his mind. At first, he simply replaced advisors whose loyalty he doubted. Then he began to imprison them. Within a year, he ordered quiet executions in the palace cellars. Names disappeared from records, faces vanished from the council chamber. Rumors seeped through the servants' quarters like a thin poison. No one knew who would be next. The diamond remained at his brow, cold and bright, as if watching. Outside the palace, Narezh's subjects felt the shift as well. Taxes increased, justified by endless campaigns. Families saw their sons conscripted and sent to far borders, never to return. In villages once proud to call themselves part of the empire, resentment took root. Scribes recorded omens, flocks of ravens circling the city, the river running thick with algae, a child born with eyes that did not reflect light.
Superstition, always the quiet shadow of power, grew bolder. A small sect of temple priests began to speak in muttered tones of an old legend, half-remembered from crumbling scrolls. A tale of a gem formed from the blood of a king, cursed to devour the fortunes of any realm that claimed it. They brought their concerns to a minor magistrate, who laughed them away. When they pressed, they were arrested for sowing fear. One by one, those who voiced unease about the diamond found themselves silenced. Those who remained learned to bow their heads more deeply and avert their gaze whenever the emperor's circlet passed. In the second year of the Eye of Dominion's reign over Narezh, disaster came not from an army at the borders, but from within. The empire's northern territories, long held under uneasy occupation, erupted in coordinated revolt. Fortresses burned, garrisons were slaughtered in their sleep, supply caravans vanished along mountain passes. Adrast, already simmering with paranoia, saw treason everywhere. Instead of listening to his more cautious generals, he acted alone, crafting a campaign of brutal retribution. He marched north in person, the diamond gleaming at his brow. The army that followed him was vast, but not as loyal as it once had been. Months of overextension, hunger, and whispered tales of endless war had eroded their faith. As they crossed into the contested lands, strange misfortunes multiplied. Horses went lame without cause. A bridge collapsed as soldiers crossed it, plunging hundreds into a ravine. A freak storm battered the camp one night, tearing tents free and sending fires racing through the supplies. Whispers circled the campfires. The diamond was cursed. The emperor was marked. The gods had turned away. Adrast heard the echoes of these murmurs in the reports brought to him, and each one fed the storm inside his mind. He doubled the pace of the march, determined to crush the rebellion with overwhelming force, as if sheer violence could silence the unease that gnawed at his own thoughts. They reached the rebel stronghold, a city built into the side of a mountain, under a sky the color of bruised steel. As the siege began, the diamond pulsed faintly against Adrast's skin. He felt a surge of cruel clarity. Strategies unfolded in his mind, sharp and ruthless. He ordered tactics that spared no one, fields salted, wells poisoned, entire villages razed to prevent them from offering shelter or grain to the rebels.
The city fell. It was inevitable. The empire still had teeth sharpened by years of conquest. But when Adrast rode through its broken gates, he did not see victory. He saw only defiance in the dead eyes of those who had chosen to stand against him. Something in that expression lodged in his thoughts like a thorn. At night he dreamed of other eyes, hundreds of them, staring from the facets of the diamond. The rebellion did not end with the fall of that one city. Instead, it fractured into smaller fires that burned across the empire. Uprisings in the west, sabotage in the east, assassination attempts in the capital. Each act of resistance was met with even greater cruelty, as if the empire were trying to smother a blaze by feeding it. In the 3rd year of the diamond's presence in Narezh, the famines began. Too many fields had been trampled by armies, too many rivers poisoned, too many farmers conscripted or killed. The harvest failed first in the border provinces, then in the fertile heartlands. Grain stores dwindled, bread shrank. People learned the shape of hunger again, and with it came anger. Adrast responded as he always did, with force. He ordered grain seized from outlying regions and brought to the capital, guarded by armed escorts. He prioritized the feeding of soldiers and court officials over common folk. The diamond at his brow flashed when he signed decrees condemning entire villages for hoarding. One night, a loyal scribe, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and ink-stained, dared to suggest that the empire needed mercy more than punishment. Adrast's gaze drifted to the glint of the diamond at the edge of his vision. A thought, cold and precise, folded over his anger. Mercy was weakness. Weakness invited destruction. He ordered the scribe executed before dawn. Somewhere deep within the facets of the cursed stone, reflections shifted. The empire's story bent a little further toward ruin. The end, when it came, did not roar in with invaders at the gates or thunderous omens in the sky. It arrived quietly at first, in the form of rumors that the southern generals had refused an order. Then came reports of soldiers deserting in large numbers, throwing down the emperor's banner and vanishing into the countryside. The treasury, strained by constant war, could no longer pay its armies promptly. Frustration curdled into resentment, resentment into rebellion. Narezh began to crack along the same lines that had once been its strength, its vastness, its diversity, its sheer size. Regions that had once reluctantly accepted imperial rule now saw an opportunity to slip free. Local leaders, priests, and former nobles began to speak openly of independence.
Each lost province tore a piece from Adrast's sense of invincibility.
He started wearing the diamond even in his private chambers, as though afraid someone might steal it in his sleep. Servants noticed the way he touched it when decisions weighed on him, fingers lingering as if seeking guidance. Sometimes they saw his expression soften into a strange, far-off look, as though he were listening to a voice just beyond the edge of hearing. No one knew that in those moments Adrast saw visions not of triumph but of collapse, burning cities, empty thrones, banners trampled in mud. At first he believed these were warnings, scenes of what would happen if he faltered. But over time, an unthinkable suspicion crept into his mind. What if these were not warnings, but promises? By then, it was too late. The final blow came from within the palace itself. A coalition of noble families, generals weary of being blamed for unwinnable wars, and priests who still remembered the old stories of cursed relics, conspired to remove Adrast from power. They did not imagine the empire could survive under his rule much longer. They hoped that by cutting out the rot at its center, they might save what remained. On a rain-dark evening, as thunder rolled across the capital and lightning flickered against the palace domes, the conspirators struck. Adrast was summoned to a hastily convened council in the Hall of Banners. He arrived flanked by guards, the circlet gleaming proudly at his brow. As the doors closed behind him, he realized no one had bowed. Accusations followed: treason, cruelty, madness, the squandering of lives and fortunes. Voices echoed in the vast chamber. Adrast stood motionless, the stone cool against his skin, and felt something inside him quietly snap. He saw the faces around him not as peers or servants, but as obstacles between him and destiny. He reached for his sword. History would later argue about what happened next. Some chronicles claimed lightning struck the hall at that precise moment, setting tapestries ablaze and plunging the room into chaos. Others insisted a hidden assassin loosed an arrow from the gallery. Some whispered that the diamond itself flashed with blinding light, confusing friend and foe alike. What all accounts agreed upon was this: by the end of that night, the Hall of Banners was filled with the dead, the Empire's most powerful figures lying in tangled heaps on the polished floor. Adrast's body was found near the central dais, his eyes wide open, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief. The circlet had rolled from his head. The diamond had fallen free and come to rest beside his outstretched hand. It was unblemished. When frightened servants crept into the hall at dawn, picking their way through the carnage, one of them spotted the gem. It lay amid a smear of dried blood, catching the first weak light of morning. For a heartbeat, the servant felt drawn to it, as if it were calling his name. Then another voice, older and rooted in simple survival, urged him to look away. He wrapped the diamond in a scrap of cloth and hid it in his sleeve. By the end of the week, news of Adrast's death had fractured Narezh completely. Provinces declared independence. Armies splintered into rival factions. The capital, once the proud heart of an empire destined for greatness, began to devour itself in riots and purges. Markets burned. The great libraries were looted. Statues toppled into the streets. Another empire dissolved into the dust of history. The servant who had taken the diamond slipped away amid the chaos, vanishing into the crowd. Somewhere on the road beyond the city, when he dared unfold the cloth and stare at the gem once more, he felt that same unsettling pull, a promise of safety, of wealth, of escape from the ruin all around him. He did not know that the pattern had already been set. Aranik had burned, Narezh had crumbled, and the cursed diamond, slick with invisible history, was ready to move on. It would find a new owner soon. It always did. The servant, who fled the collapsing empire of Narezh, had no name worth recording in history, but his disappearance marked the quiet beginning of the diamond's next chapter. For weeks he drifted from province to province, hiding the gem beneath layers of cloth and fear, never sleeping more than a few hours at a time. Whenever he tried to sell it, something stopped him. Sometimes the sudden sickness of a potential buyer, sometimes a street brawl erupting at the worst moment, sometimes nothing more than a cold weight settling in his chest. Eventually, the servant began to believe the gem did not want to be sold. By the time he reached the city of Dal Ket, a sprawling maze of stone alleys and rooftop shanties perched along the cliffs of the southern passage, he had grown gaunt and paranoid. He avoided busy markets, avoided conversations, avoided even the shadows that moved strangely along the walls at night. And still, the diamond seemed to burn through the cloth at his chest, demanding attention. Dal Ket should have been a refuge, a place to vanish in the crowd, but fate, guided by the gem's quiet hunger, had already chosen a new path. On the fourth night in the city, the servant, trembling and exhausted, slipped into a tavern by the docks. He ordered a bowl of broth he could barely afford and sat alone, clutching his pouch with both hands. His eyes darted from patron to patron, as if every face to turn suddenly hostile. None did. Most were sailors, gamblers, or wanderers, too focused on their own misfortunes to notice one thin, trembling man in the corner.
One person noticed. His name was Rollick, the Whisper, though most simply called him Whisper. He was a thief, but not one who skulked in shadows or boasted in taverns about his exploits. Rollick was a ghost who walked among crowds unnoticed, a man with a patient smile and a quiet voice who never drew too much attention. The guilds of Dal Ket whispered that he could open any lock, lift any purse, charm any guard, and disappear without leaving footprints. But more than skill, Rollick possessed something more dangerous. He could smell weakness the way a wolf smells blood. From across the tavern, Rollick saw the trembling servant clutching his pouch as though holding a dying child. He watched the man flinch whenever footsteps approached the table. Something valuable lay hidden beneath that ragged tunic, something the servant feared losing more than life itself. Rollick pretended not to look. He sipped his drink. He turned the pages of a weather-stained journal as if nothing in the room interested him at all. But inside his mind, pieces clicked swiftly into place. By dawn, the servant's pouch was in Rollick's possession. It was an easy theft. Rollick followed the man into a narrow alley that twisted between leaning stone walls. When the servant paused to rest, Rollick struck. A swift grip around the neck, a hand muffling the mouth, a knife pressed lightly against the ribs to silence instinctive struggle. Rollick spoke softly, almost apologetically, as he loosened the pouch from the servant's shuddering hands. "It's nothing personal," he whispered. "You carry your fear like a torch. People like me can't help but follow the light." He left the servant alive. It was a kindness, though not one the gem would reward. When Rollick reached his rooftop hideaway, a cramped room cluttered with lockpicks, maps, half-empty bottles, and stolen trinkets, he emptied the pouch onto a wooden crate. A single diamond rolled into the dim light. Rollick had stolen gemstones before. He knew their weight, their luster, the way they caught fire from the faintest flame. This one was different. It did not merely reflect the candlelight. It held it, bending it inward until the stone seemed to glow like the ember of a dying star. As he lifted it, a ripple of cold traveled through his fingers.
A rush of thoughts flooded his mind, visions of riches, of vaults filled with gold, of cities bowing at his feet. It lasted only a moment, but when it faded, Rollick found himself smiling. I could retire, buy half the city, live like a king. He did not yet know how many kings the gem had already destroyed.
That night, Rollick hid the diamond beneath a loose tile in the floor. He slept with the calm confidence of a man who believed he controlled his fate. But something woke him before dawn. Not a sound, but a feeling, a presence in the small room. The air felt heavy, as though someone else stood beside his bed. Rollick rose, knife drawn, scanning the shadows. Nothing. Only the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the shutters. He cursed himself for paranoia and lay back down. But sleep did not return. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the diamond, gleaming, pulsing softly, waiting. By morning, he decided there was no point delaying. He would sell it. But Dalket was a city where information moved faster than coin. By the time Rollick stepped into the marketplace, whispers had already begun to flow. A gem found in the ashes of Narezh, a stone that ruined the Emperor's mind, a jewel that carried death in its shine. The city's jewelers refused him. Some claimed fear, others superstition, others suspicion of theft. One old woman spat on the ground when he described it, insisting she wanted nothing cursed brought near her stall. Frustration gnawed at him. Worse, he felt something else, attachment. He returned to his hideaway and unwrapped the diamond again. In the quiet room, it seemed brighter, sharper, as if feeding on his attention. He did not sleep that night. Over the next days, strange coincidences began to follow him. Doors he had locked were found open. Footsteps trailed him through the market. A thief he trusted, a woman who had once saved his life, watched him with a wary suspicion, as if sensing something unnatural. Then came the dreams. Rollick found himself wandering through endless ruins, walls cracked and smoking, a crown lying broken at his feet. He saw flames devouring armies, cities drowned in flood, towers collapsing into dust. In every ruin, the diamond lay untouched, gleaming among the destruction. In some dreams, he heard voices, soft, eager, hungry. Rollick stopped eating. His hands shook. He began to speak to the diamond at night, half crazed from lack of sleep. "You're dangerous. I know it. But you're worth more than anything I've ever touched."
He did not realize that every word bound him more tightly. The curse worked slowly on thieves. Unlike kings or servants, they were used to shadows, used to secrets whispering in their ears. The diamond slid into the cracks of Rollick's nature with patient precision, feeding his greed, sharpening his paranoia, twisting his ambitions. Rollick began plotting not to sell the gem, but to use it. He imagined blackmailing nobles, buying influence, forcing guildmasters to bow. The diamond had shown him visions of power, and he was certain they were prophecies, not warnings. He did not notice that his friends avoided him, that the city guards watched his movements, that someone, maybe several someones, sought what he carried. The diamond's curse had set the stage. The first death came quietly. A rival thief attempted to break into Rollick's hideaway. In the struggle, Rollick's blade found the man's throat. The dying thief, choking on his own blood, whispered, "You're cursed. It's not meant to be held." Rollick wiped the blood from his hands and told himself it was self-defense. But the dream that night showed him standing atop a pile of bodies, each face someone he recognized. A week later, another thief confronted him in an alley, demanding the gem. Rollick killed him too. This time it was not self-defense, it was fear,
panic that someone might take the diamond. Somewhere deep inside, a part of Rollick knew what he had become, but the gem did not allow remorse to shape him, only hunger. The city began to whisper his name, not with respect but dread. Then one night, as Rollick returned to his hideaway, he found the floorboards torn up, the hiding place empty. Someone had stolen the diamond. Rollick screamed, an animal sound, raw and desperate. He tore the room apart, overturning crates, ripping through old blankets, searching with the intensity of a starving man clawing for food. But it was gone. In the alley below his window, he heard the faint sound of running footsteps. Rollick chased the thief across rooftops and narrow bridges, through lantern-lit streets and silent courtyards. The moon hung low, casting long shadows. The thief, swift but inexperienced, glanced back once. Rollick saw terror in the young man's eyes.
He caught him at the edge of the cliff path. The thief stumbled, the diamond flickering in his hand like a shard of trapped moonlight. For a moment, Rollick hesitated. Taking a life had never been personal for him, but now it was everything. The thought of losing the gem tore something loose inside his mind. The cliff crumbled beneath their struggle. Both men fell. The thief's body crashed against the rocks. Rollick survived only because he struck an outcropping and slid part way down the cliff. Bones cracked, blood filled his mouth, but through the haze he saw it. The diamond lying beside him on the ledge, untouched, gleaming as if amused. With a broken laugh, Rollick reached for it. But before his fingers closed around the stone, a shadow loomed overhead. A hooded figure descended the cliff with silent precision. Without a word, the stranger picked up the diamond and tucked it into his cloak. Rollick tried to speak, tried to rise, but agony pinned him to the rocks. The stranger looked down at him. When he spoke, his voice was calm, papery, ancient. "You should not have touched what devours men." Rollick tried to whisper a plea, but his voice failed. The stranger turned and climbed away, the diamond vanishing with him into the night. Rollick lay on the rocks until dawn, breath rattling, watching the sun rise one last time. His final thought was not regret, but longing for the gem, for the visions it had shown him, for the power it had dangled like bait before his hungry soul. He died alone, broken, forgotten. Above him the stranger who had claimed the diamond walked toward the monastery at the top of the cliff, where cloistered scholars waited. They believed they could contain the cursed stone. They were wrong. A new chapter of ruin was beginning. The diamond had found its next keeper.
The monks of the cliffside monastery believed they were guardians of forgotten truths. For centuries they had collected relics of vanished kingdoms, scrolls written in dying tongues, and artifacts that whispered of wars no historian wished to remember. Their halls were cold, their lives disciplined, their minds sharpened by prayer and silence. They had contained plagues, sealed away cursed idols, even disassembled a bronze idol that was said to drive men mad. But nothing they had ever held compared to the diamond the hooded stranger delivered on a storm-torn morning. He arrived soaked, half-frozen, his cloak shredded by wind and falling rock. The monks rushed to take him inside, but he pushed their hands away and demanded an audience with the High Keeper. When they brought him to the inner sanctum, its walls lined with relics behind iron latticework, he finally unwrapped the cloth bundled at his chest. The High Keeper's breath caught. The diamond seemed almost alive in the lamplight, its facets shifting subtly like the movement of eyes watching from behind a veil. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat trapped in crystal. "Seal it," the stranger rasped. "Seal it deeper than any other relic, for the sake of every kingdom yet standing." He collapsed before he could say more. The monks tended to him, but the stranger never woke again. Fever consumed him within a day, and by the second night he was buried beneath a canon of stones overlooking the dark sea. The diamond, however, remained, and from the moment it entered the monastery, the air grew heavier, colder, as if the structure itself strained under invisible weight. For a week, the monks debated whether to destroy it. Some claimed it was blasphemy even to consider. Others believed destruction was impossible. The oldest scrolls said the gem was born not of earth, but of ritual, the kind that twisted divine forces into something monstrous. On the seventh night, a monk named Sered suggested they transport the gem to the northern vaults, where only the most dangerous relics were kept. But when they assembled at dawn to carry it, the pedestal was empty. The stone was gone. The locks unopened, the bars unsawed, the sanctum undisturbed. It had simply vanished. The monks tore the monastery apart, searching for it, but the diamond had already slipped into the world again, as if guided by invisible hands. Far below the cliffs, on the coastal road leading to the bustling port city of Kaltavar, a merchant caravan trudged through rain and mud. Among the drivers was a man named Henrik Aldane, a trader of spices, dyes, and whatever else turned quick profit. His wagons bore the sigil of the Aldane Trading House, a once powerful merchant guild that now clung to survival by selling inferior goods for inflated prices.
Henrik was ambitious, clever, and dangerously dissatisfied with his station. He wanted more: wealth, influence, the kind that lifted men from obscurity and placed them in the halls of nobles. What he lacked in patience, he made up for in ruthless instinct. That evening, as the caravan camped near the cliffs, Henrik wandered from the fire to relieve himself and spotted something glimmering on a patch of wet grass. It looked at first like a shard of glass left behind by careless travelers, but when he picked it up, cold fire surged through his hand. A diamond, perfect, untouched, far larger than anything a beggar might have dropped. Henrik's breath came fast. He lifted it toward the moonlight and felt his pulse stutter. The diamond was flawless, so flawless that he felt a tremor of dread. Nothing in nature was this perfect. But fear was quickly smothered by greed. "It's mine," he whispered, gripping it tightly. "My luck has finally turned." In that moment, the diamond pulsed, once faintly, like acknowledgement. The next weeks were the most profitable of Henrik's life. When he reached Kaltavar, he entered a dice game as a whim and walked away with enough silver to stock his caravans for months. When he negotiated the purchase of rare dyes, the seller inexplicably dropped his price mid-conversation, claiming a sudden headache. When he entered the trade council chambers, where merchants bickered like jackals, the most influential among them fell silent as he spoke, as though his words carried unusual weight. He began carrying the diamond in a pouch around his neck. Whenever he touched it, ideas flooded his mind: opportunities, paths to take, people to manipulate. He convinced himself these were his own clever strategies, not whispers planted by something trapped in the stone. Within half a year, the Aldane Trading House flourished beyond imagination. Henrik bought warehouses, ships, entire caravans. His name became known from the desert ports of the south to the frozen bazaars of the north. He built a mansion on the cliffs overlooking the harbor, tall columns, high walls, rooms filled with imported marble and silk. Henrik Aldan, people whispered, the man who rose from nothing. But wealth is a poor foundation for character, and the diamond had not chosen Henrik for his ambition alone. It had chosen him because he was easy to bend. The first break came when his competitors began to die.
A merchant drowned in his own wine cellar.
Another was crushed by falling crates. A third vanished entirely. These deaths occurred far from Henrik's hands, yet the diamond seemed to glow brighter each time news reached him. His wife, Mara, noticed the change in him first. "You don't sleep," she said one night, touching his shoulder. "You whisper to yourself in the dark. You stare at that pouch as though it speaks to you." Henrik pulled away. "You don't understand what I'm building." "What you're building?" She stepped back, hurt and bewildered. "Henrik, you're becoming something I barely recognize." "Power changes men," he said coldly. "You should be grateful." Something in her eyes hardened then, but Henrik didn't care. The diamond had become the only companion he needed. Soon the city began to shift under Henrik's influence. Trade routes changed, prices soared. Entire shiploads of grain disappeared into his warehouses, only to be sold later at famine prices. Rivals who complained found their ships mysteriously sinking or their warehouses burned. Kaltavar grew wealthy, but the wealth flowed in one direction, toward Henrik. And the city paid the price. Food shortages struck first, then labor strikes, then violent riots. Henrik responded the way the diamond guided him, with more control. He paid mercenaries to guard his goods, then turned them against the people. Streets filled with blood, markets burned, families starved while Henrik feasted. And still he touched the diamond. One night, he dreamed of the servant who had fled Narezh. The man's dead eyes stared at him through the facets of the gem, lips moving silently as though warning him. Henrik awoke, drenched in sweat, clutching the diamond so hard it cut into his skin. He threw the gem across the room, but when he looked again, it was no longer on the floor. It lay on the table beside him, as though it had never moved. The ruin of Kaltavar came with the ships. Dozens of merchant vessels arrived one spring morning, sails torn, crews coughing blood. A strange plague had swept through the northern ports, black veins, fever, madness, and the sailors had fled south seeking refuge.
Henrik saw opportunity where others saw disaster. He ordered his men to intercept the ships and quarantine them, not out of mercy, but greed. He seized control of the docks, claiming the plague gave him authority to dictate trade. In doing so, he trapped the disease within the city. The plague spread like wildfire. As bodies piled in the streets, people begged Henrik to release the food he hoarded. He refused. A starving city is a city willing to buy anything at any price. When the riots broke through the mansion gates, Henrik fled to the cliffs with the diamond clenched in his fist. Below him, Kaltavar burned ships, aflame, markets collapsing, screams rising into the smoke-thick sky. He felt no regret, only anger that the city had turned against him. "You were supposed to make me great," he hissed at the gem, "not destroy everything." But the diamond pulsed softly, as though amused. In his fury, Henrik raised the gem to smash it against the cliff rocks, but the ground shook violently. A tremor split the edge beneath his feet. The cliff gave way. Henrik fell into the darkness below, the sea swallowing him. When the waves pulled back, the diamond glinted on the shore, untouched. A fisherman found it the next morning. He lifted it with trembling hands, unaware of what had passed before him. And so the curse moved on, patient as the tide, ready to lead another life toward ruin, another realm toward collapse, just as it had done since the day it was cut from the dying heart of a king. The diamond was never lost. It simply waited.
The diamond sailed into the next chapter of its long, bloody journey on the tide of tragedy. After the fall of Kaltavar, it passed through a dozen desperate hands, fishermen, smugglers, pirates, who fought over it until only one remained standing. For years it traveled the coasts like a shadow, seeking a home, slipping from corpse to survivor, from greed to fear, until it reached the kingdom of Veloria, a land where silk and steel were the ruler's weapons, and reputation was worth more than blood. Veloria was beautiful on the surface, marble palaces, soaring gardens, fountains that spilled over mosaics of sapphire and gold. But underneath, it was a realm balanced on fragile peace. A war with a northern rival had left the treasury gutted, the nobles restless, and the people starving beneath a veneer of elegance. Whispers of rebellion stirred in taverns and in smoke-filled guild halls. The throne, though gilded, sat on cracking stone.
Its occupant was Queen Lysandra Vane, a woman revered for her poise and feared for her intelligence. She had inherited the throne young, at the brutal cost of her husband's assassination, a wound that left her wary, cold, and fiercely protective of her lineage. Her people called her the Silver Queen, after the luminous streak of silver hair that fell across her temple, a symbol, some claimed, of the stress carved into her life. Yet despite her stern reputation, Lysandra was deeply beloved by her inner circle. Among them stood Prince Elion, her only son, a boy of 13 with a bright laugh and a dangerous curiosity. He was her last remaining joy, the embers of hope that kept her rule from turning to ice. And it was for him that the diamond finally found its way into the palace. It arrived in a velvet-lined box as part of a diplomatic gift from the merchant princes of the Eastern Archipelago. They claimed it was a peace offering, a token to strengthen relations strained by the famine that had struck both realms. The gift was elaborate enough to mask the diamond's presence: bolts of dyed silk, chests of spices, lacquered ornaments, carved ivory animals. But when Lysandra lifted the last piece of silk and saw the gem lying beneath, her breath hitched. It did not gleam like an ordinary jewel. It glowed. The queen, who trusted nothing and no one, felt her fingers tremble as she lifted it. The diamond seemed impossibly clear, as though carved from frozen light. In it she saw not just reflections, but visions. The face of her son grown older, crowned and powerful, the throne room filled with prosperity, Veloria restored to its former strength. The future looked so bright it felt like a promise. Lysandra, for the first time in months, allowed herself to hope. "This," she whispered, "is an omen of fortune." But the advisors around her shifted uneasily. A few stepped back. One made the sign to ward off spirits. They sensed something wrong in the air, an undercurrent that prickled their skin. The queen ignored them. She declared the diamond a symbol of Veloria's rebirth, and ordered it set into a pendant of gold filigree to be worn during ceremonies. A renowned jeweler crafted the setting, but his hands trembled from the moment he began until the final twist of gold. That night, he fled the city without collecting his payment. Lysandra placed the pendant around her neck the next morning. The kingdom's downfall began at that exact moment.
At first, the change was subtle. Lysandra grew sharper in her speech, colder in her decisions. She dismissed several long-serving advisors because she caught falsehoods in their eyes. She tightened taxes on the nobles, claiming they hoarded wealth in secret, though no evidence ever surfaced. Servants began to whisper that the queen no longer slept. She paced the halls at night, speaking under her breath, the pendant glowing faintly against her chest. Prince Elion watched his mother with worry. "You look tired," he said one morning as they walked the palace gardens. "Maybe you should rest." "I cannot rest while vipers circle my throne," she replied, her gaze fixed on the distant spires of the council chambers. "They think me blind, but I see everything now." Her fingers brushed the diamond unconsciously. Elion frowned. He wanted to ask more, but a shadow crossed his mother's face, brief yet chilling enough to silence him. At court hearings, Lysandra began accusing nobles of conspiracies with terrifying precision. She could describe their private meetings, their secret alliances, their whispered plots, facts that no one should have known. Her accusations drove wedges between families and ignited rivalries that poisoned the noble houses. Some bowed to her out of fear. Others began to sharpen daggers in hidden rooms. The first assassination attempt came swiftly. A masked intruder slipped into the queen's chambers at night, dagger poised. But Lysandra was waiting, eyes wide open, expression eerily calm. Before the assassin could strike, the queen seized his wrist with a strength that startled even her guards. When they arrived, she stood over the unconscious intruder, the diamond shining like a cold star. "See," she murmured, "the traitors multiply." But the assassin was not a mercenary, nor a noble, nor even a rebel. He was one of her own palace guards. Something had warped inside the palace, trust curdling into suspicion, suspicion into terror. And Lysandra fed on it, guided by the whispers only she could hear.
Within weeks, Veloria's stability collapsed. The nobles split into factions, each accusing the others of scheming for the throne. Riots erupted in the poorer districts, sparked by rumors that the queen hoarded supplies while the city starved. The military, caught between loyalty and fear, fractured. Some swore absolute allegiance to Lysandra, convinced she foresaw plots from miles away. Others defected, claiming the queen had lost her mind. Through it all, she wore the pendant. Her eyes grew sunken, her hair lost its luster, her voice gained a harsh, brittle edge that everyone grew to dread. Servants began to avoid her gaze, terrified that she might accuse them of betrayal simply for breathing. Elion, once her joy, now became her obsession. She saw danger in every corridor he walked. She dismissed his tutors, imprisoned his friends, and forbade him from leaving the palace grounds. "You are the future of Veloria," she told him, gripping his shoulders too tightly. "You will live. You must live. I will eliminate every threat." "But there are no threats," Elion whispered, terrified. The queen's eyes flashed with something sharp and unnatural. "You are blind," she hissed, "but I am not." That night, Elion overheard her speaking softly to the pendant, her tone reverent, trembling. Show me who plots against us." The diamond pulsed like a living thing. Lysandra gasped, and the next day she ordered the arrest of her own sister, claiming she had plotted a coup. Elion sobbed as his aunt was dragged away. As Veloria unraveled, the diamond hungered. Misfortune spread like wildfire. Crops failed from sudden blight. A plague of locusts devoured the farmlands. A fire broke out in the lower city, consuming entire districts. Lysandra interpreted each catastrophe as evidence of rebellion. She tightened her grip further. Those who resisted were executed. Those who obeyed starved. All the while, the gem glowed brighter. Historians would one day write that Veloria fell not to enemies, but to paranoia. But the truth was far darker. The diamond did not merely feed on tragedy. It created it. Elion finally realized the truth the night he saw the pendant glow on its own.
His mother stood by the throne, her face pale, her hands trembling. The gem blazed white, too bright to look at. Her breath came in frantic gasps. "It's speaking to me," she whispered. "It shows me the path, the only path." Elion reached her, tears streaming down his face. "Mother, please take it off." Lysandra recoiled as if struck. "You don't understand. Without it, I am blind again. Without it, we will lose everything."
What followed became legend. The Night of Shattered Crowns. The palace became a maze of flickering torchlight, echoing footsteps and shouts. Elion fled through hidden passages his father had shown him years ago. Loyal guards intercepted the queen's soldiers. Ministers fled. Servants barricaded doors. The city outside erupted when news spread that the prince was marked for death. Chaos engulfed Veloria. Lysandra moved like a woman possessed, her hair tangled, her breath sharp, her eyes lit by the diamond's unnatural glow. She stormed through corridors, calling Elion's name with a voice cracked by desperation and madness. By dawn, the palace was in ruins. Fires smoldered, blood stained the marble floors. Lysandra stood in the throne room alone, her pendant cracked from the strain of its own dark power. The diamond flickered weakly. For the first time in weeks, her mind cleared and horror flooded in. What had she done? Before she could think, a final tremor shook the palace. A chandelier, massive, gilded, suspended over the throne, snapped its chain. It crashed down upon her. When the dust settled, the queen lay crushed beneath twisted bronze and shattered glass. Her hand, reaching from the wreckage, still clutched the pendant. But the diamond had rolled free. It lay unbroken among the rubble, cold and quiet, as if watching. Elion, found alive hours later by sympathetic guards, saw it glimmering in the morning light. He felt an instinctive pull, an urge to pick it up, but he stepped away, trembling. A palace servant, seeking valuables to loot amid the destruction, spotted the diamond next. He pocketed it without hesitation. Veloria fell within a month. The diamond had moved on, and somewhere in the ashes of the kingdom she loved, the memory of Queen Lysandra Vane remained, not as a tyrant, but as the woman who wore misfortune around her neck, blind to the storm she had invited into her heart. For years after Veloria's collapse, the diamond drifted across borders and battlefields like a specter seeking its next stage. Wherever it went, small tragedies unfolded, fires without cause, sudden storms, whispered betrayals that tore families apart. But these were only preludes, faint echoes of the devastation it would soon unleash, because the world was changing. Sails were growing larger, maps were growing broader, ambition stretched its fingers across oceans, hungry for lands unclaimed and riches unknown. Explorers sought glory, empires sought control, and merchants sought the treasures rumored to lie beyond the horizon. And the diamond, silent, patient, felt the shift like a call. It wanted a wider canvas. It wanted the world. It eventually found its way into the hands of Captain Aronith Hulvard, commander of the expeditionary vessel the Nightwind. Ronith was a decorated navigator, respected and feared, known for his daring voyages. His crew believed he could read the sea like scripture and the stars like a prophecy. Some said he had salt water in his veins instead of the blood. But those who knew him well whispered something else. Ronith was desperate. The Court of Mariners, the governing body of the coastal kingdoms, had rejected his latest proposal to explore the unmapped southern waters. They claimed it was too dangerous, too costly, too distant. They mocked his theories of hidden continents and ancient civilizations. Ronith's pride burned, and he vowed to prove them wrong. Yet funding such an expedition required wealth he did not possess. Until, one humid night in the taverns of Port Isura, a drunk peddler staggered in and offered him a gem so flawless that Ronith's breath stopped. "Payment for passage. Anywhere. Anywhere far from here. Take me away from the roads. They follow me. The voices. I can't." He never finished his plea. Ronith's first mate found the peddler dead an hour later behind the tavern, throat cut, pockets empty, except for the diamond the captain had already accepted. Ronith should have taken this as a warning. Instead, he saw it as fate. The diamond paid for every supply he needed: food, water, tools, compasses, repairs to the night wind, a crew of eager sailors hungry for adventure. Even the court of mariners begrudgingly granted him leave to embark, bribed unknowingly by the gem that now sat wrapped in silk in Ronith's cabin. The voyage began under clear skies and a wind that carried the scent of possibility.
In the early weeks of the journey, the diamond seemed like a blessing. Ronith used it as a navigation charm, believing it sharpened his instincts. And in a way, it did, though not as he thought. When he held the stone, faint thoughts drifted into his mind. Turn south, avoid the reefs, trust the current. The storm will break soon. He followed these whispers, convinced they were flashes of insight. The crew began to view him as a man favored by destiny. But after 30 days at sea, the crew's admiration shifted to unease. The diamond had begun to glow faintly during the night, casting pale reflections across the cabin walls. Ronith claimed it was a trick of lantern light, but the men muttered prayers and avoided looking directly at it. Then came the dreams. Ronith dreamed of cities swallowed by waves, their towers sinking into dark water. He dreamed of forests burning beneath crimson skies. He dreamed of skeletons half buried in deserts, their empty sockets reflecting the diamond's cold gleam. And he dreamed of an island, a massive shape rising from the sea like a beast awakening. An island with a stone temple at its heart and an altar carved into the shape of a tear. Every night, the dream grew sharper, more detailed. Soon he could map the island from memory. The diamond showed him the way. He believed this gift undeniable proof that his discovery would reshape history. The crew believed it was a curse. The first sign of disaster came with the scream of a lookout at dawn. A fog rolled across the sea without warning, thick, white, suffocating. The ship's lanterns barely pierced it. The air grew cold enough to frost the ropes. The sailors whispered that spirits walked in the mist. Then something massive struck the hull. The ship rocked violently. Men tumbled across the deck. The fog thinned just enough to reveal a shape slipping beneath the waves, a creature larger than any whale they had recorded, its pale back streaked with scars like claw marks. Ronith ordered the men to steady the sails, but fear had already taken root. Some demanded they turn back. Others insisted the fog was an omen. Ronith touched the diamond for reassurance. The gem pulsed. "We continue," he commanded. "The sea tests us, that is all." But the sea was not testing them. It was warning them. The second calamity struck a week later. A storm descended with impossible speed. No gradual darkening of clouds, no shift in the wind. One moment the sky was clear, and the next it was split with lightning.
Waves towered like mountains. The mast snapped. Men were thrown overboard, their screams drowned by the thunder. The sea churned as though alive, lifting the ship and rocking it with brutal force. Ronith clung to the wheel, refusing to abandon his course. "We're close," he shouted against the storm. "I can feel it." Lightning struck the water beside the ship, blue fire racing across the waves like living veins. The men fell to their knees, praying as the storm tore the world apart around them. When the dawn finally broke, only 19 of the original 42 crew remained. But Ronith smiled, because through the clearing mist he saw it, an island rising from the horizon, just as in his dreams. The island was vast, covered in dense jungles, cliffs of obsidian stone, and waterfalls that cascaded into white sand coves. In the center rose a towering pyramid-shaped temple, blackened by age and carved with symbols the sailors could not decipher. The men refused to go ashore. Ronith went alone. The jungle swallowed him instantly, dense vines twisting around shattered statues, roots gripping half-buried ruins. The air felt thick, vibrating with an unsettling silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch this place. The temple waited like an open mouth. Ronith climbed its steps with trembling hands, clutching the diamond tightly. When he reached the summit, he found an altar carved with the image of a tear, just as in his dreams. He held up the diamond. It glowed brighter than he had ever seen. Ronith felt something inside him break loose, ecstasy, despair, terror, awe, all crashing together like a tidal wave. He placed the gem on the altar. The air split open. A surge of heat and sound erupted like the whisper of 10,000 voices chanting at once. The stone beneath his feet shuddered. Cracks raced across the altar. The island itself seemed to tremble as though waking from a long sleep. The diamond flashed, blinding white. And then everything went dark. The crew waited for Ronith to return. He never did. When the island trembled violently, they cut the lines anchoring the ship and let the current pull them away. Behind them, the jungle trees toppled, cliffs broke apart, and the temple crumbled into the sea. From the sinking ruins, something glimmered. The diamond. It floated, not sinking, not burning, carried by the waves like a survivor. One sailor, weakened by hunger and terror, reached out from the side of the drifting vessel and scooped it from the water. And so, the curse began anew. The island vanished beneath the waves, swallowed except for jagged peaks like teeth breaking the surface. The crew never spoke of what they saw. They vowed silence, but the diamond did not care. It had found its next host. And the age of explorers had only just begun to feel its shadow, stretched across oceans, carved into maps, pulling entire nations toward ruin. The sailor who pulled the diamond from the sea believed he had rescued a miracle. He could not have been more wrong. His name was Jorik Vale, a man of broad shoulders, scarred hands, and a weary soul, hardened by too many voyages. After the disaster of the Night Wind and the vanishing island, the surviving crew drifted at sea for days, each man half-starved, sunburned, and haunted by the visions that had plagued their doomed journey. Hope came only when a merchant brig from the vast Torinthian Empire spotted their battered vessel and hauled them aboard.
Jorik should have thrown the diamond back into the sea as soon as he climbed onto the rescue ship. Instead, he hid it. Not because he feared it would be stolen, but because he feared what the others would say. The stone made his skin prickle, his dreams writhe, and yet he could not let it go. It filled him with the quiet, seductive illusion of purpose, as though carrying it made him the protagonist of some unseen destiny. "Keep the secret," a voice would whisper in his sleep. "You were chosen." By the time the brig reached the Torinthian capital of Eldros, Jorik's fate was sealed.
Eldros was a city carved from ambition. Its towers pierced the sky like spears aimed at the heavens. Its streets were paved with stones quarried from conquered lands. Its ports brought in spices from the southern kingdoms, silver from the desert mines, and exotic animals from distant jungles, all feeding the insatiable maw of an empire in ascendance. But Torinthia's rise came at a cost. Corruption seeped through its courts, and greed clung to its merchants like a second skin. The poor starved in the shadow of mansions built from plundered wealth. Soldiers marched through the streets, enforcing the emperor's peace with heavy hands. It was the perfect place for the diamond to flourish. Jorik, with only a sailor's wage and the lingering trauma of the nightmare voyage, sought work at the docks. But day after day he found himself distracted, his fingers brushing the pouch at his chest, his mind filled with sudden flashes of ambition. One day he wandered into the heart of the capital, drawn as if by fate to the Astorian Exchange, the empire's grand center of trade. Inside, surrounded by nobles, merchants, and investors, he felt an overwhelming urge. Show them. Jorik pulled the diamond from his pouch. Gasps erupted across the marble hall. Traders surged forward. Officials whispered in awe. A man in velvet robes fainted. "Where did you get this?" demanded a merchant lord. Jorik, overwhelmed by fear and pride, lied. "From a hidden island. An island no map yet claims." Those words sealed the empire's doom. Within hours, the diamond was brought before Archconsul Meriden Vorsk, the most powerful political figure in Torinthia, the emperor's right hand and the architect of its colonial expansion. Meriden Vorsk was a man forged by ambition. His intelligence was sharp enough to cut, his gaze cold enough to freeze rivers. He had risen from minor nobility to the pinnacle of Torinthia through cunning alliances, calculated betrayals, and ruthless efficiency. When Jorik's diamond was placed before him, Meriden felt something shift in the air, a tightening, a hum, a crackle of invisible energy. "It is beautiful," he murmured.
Jorik shivered. Something in the Archconsul's voice seemed too calm, too reverent. "Where is this island you speak of?" Meriden asked. Jorik hesitated. The diamond seemed to pulse in his hand, encouraging him. "In the southern waters," he whispered, "past the storm belts." "Could you find it again?" "I think so." Meriden smiled, a thin, dangerous curve. "Then you will serve the Empire." Jorik did not realize that serve was another word for sacrifice. Within a week, Meriden launched the largest expedition in Torinthian history. 3 warships, 2 cargo vessels, 100 soldiers, several scholars, and Jorik as their unwilling guide. The Archconsul himself joined the voyage, wearing the diamond on a golden chain at his throat. From the moment the fleet set sail, the men felt something was wrong. The winds shifted erratically, compasses malfunctioned,
Birds refused to fly near the ships. At night, ghostly lights shimmered on the waves, and sailors dreamed of burning cities, drowning empires, and their own corpses floating face down in black water. Meriden, however, felt invincible. The diamond whispered to him constantly, feeding him visions of triumph. New continents claimed in his name, vast jungles hiding untapped gold, savage tribes bowing before the Terinthian banner, his face carved into monuments. He became convinced the island Jorek described was the key to a legend, the myth of Umbrasha, an ancient civilization said to possess godlike knowledge and immeasurable wealth. He would find Umbrasha. He would rule Umbrasha. The empire would stretch across the world.
But the more he listened to the diamond, the more the crew suffered. Storms battered the fleet, splitting one ship apart. Strange illnesses swept through the cabins, fevers that made men scream until their throats tore. Food spoiled at an unnatural rate. The sea itself seemed to turn against them, currents twisting in impossible patterns as though trying to drag them downward. "Turn back," begged the scholars. "We are cursed," whispered the sailors. "The diamond is to blame," Jorek said, trembling. But Meriden ignored them all. He ordered the fleet onward. When at last the carved spires of the sunken island rose from the waves, the crew wept, not with joy, but with dread. The island was not as Jorek remembered. It was worse. A black monolith jutted from the heart of the jungle like a spear aimed at the sky. The land around it seemed scorched, lifeless, as if scorched by some ancient calamity. Skeletons, human, animal, unidentifiable, littered the shores. Still, Meriden pressed on. He led the soldiers into the jungle, diamond blazing at his throat. Every step deeper warped the air. Trees twisted unnaturally. Shadows moved when the sun did not. A low hum vibrated in the ground, reminiscent of distant chanting. Several soldiers broke ranks, screaming that the island was alive, that the stone was calling to something beneath the earth. Meriden executed them for cowardice. At dusk, they reached the monolith. It was covered in symbols, some older than recorded history, some matching the runes etched within the diamond. "It is a message," Meriden whispered, "a calling, a promise." Jorek backed away slowly. "Sir, this place is wrong." Meriden ignored him. He lifted the diamond toward the monolith.
The jungle fell silent. The wind stopped. The earth trembled. The monolith split open. A blast of heat and light hurled the soldiers backward. Cracks raced across the island as if the land itself was screaming. A column of smoke shot into the sky. And then the collapse began. Trees toppled, cliffs shattered, the sea pulled back violently as if preparing to swallow the island whole. Men fled toward the shore, but the ground opened beneath them, dragging dozens into the abyss. Jorek ran, slipping on ash and blood. Behind him, he heard Meriden laughing, wild, triumphant, mad, as he held the diamond aloft. "I am destined," Meriden screamed. "The Empire is destined." The monolith exploded. A shockwave rolled across the island. Meriden was thrown from the crumbling cliffs. The diamond, torn from his neck, flew into the air. And as the island sank, Jorek saw it land near his feet, glowing, unscathed, as though mocking him. He grabbed it. He could not explain why. Madness, perhaps. Or maybe the gem wanted him alive. The next morning, only one ship survived the cataclysm. Only 8 sailors remained aboard, Jorek among them.
They did not dare speak of the island. They did not dare speak of Mirrodin. They sailed west, praying the ocean would release them from the nightmare. But Turinthia was not saved. The catastrophe spread like wildfire through the empire. Crops withered from an inexplicable blight, boats overturned in calm water, mines collapsed, riots erupted in poor districts, fires consumed entire neighborhoods without cause. The emperor fell ill with hallucinations. Trade routes closed as ports sank into chaos.
Some whispered that the gods had turned against them. Some blamed foreign enemies. Some invoked the wrath of the sea. But the truth lay hidden in Jorek's coat pocket. The diamond, the old, patient curse, the silent architect of ruin. And Jorek, broken, lost, half-mad, wandered the streets of Eldros searching for a place to bury it. He never found one. Instead, a thief followed him into an alley. A knife flashed. Jorek fell. The thief looted the body. And thus the diamond passed once more into the world, hungry, restless, ready to carve its way through yet another empire. The thief who stabbed Jorek Vale never learned his name, never cared to. All he saw was a man poorly dressed and muttering to himself, a man unlikely to carry gold. But desperation knows no discrimination. He rifled through Jorek's pockets until he found it, a pouch, heavier than expected, tied with fraying cord. He grinned. But the moment he loosened the pouch and saw what glittered inside, the grin froze on his lips. The diamond shone like a frozen star, cold light flickering in its depths. For a heartbeat, the thief felt its beauty. Then terror crept in, pricking his skin like needles. Something inside him whispered that the gem was wrong. Yet greed, as always, spoke louder. He slipped it into his vest and vanished into the shadows, only to be found hours later lying face down near the city gates, eyes wide open, body stiff with fear. No wound, no struggle. The diamond was gone. It had found a new host.
The next, its journey began in the hands of Lord Emperor Adrast, an aristocrat whose wealth came from old bloodlines and whose reputation rested on a single unnerving passion. He collected death. Not murder victims, no. Aramond detested violence, but he was obsessed with the study of what death left behind. Bones, funerary masks, relics taken from burial sites, mummified hands, urns containing centuries-old ashes. He believed death revealed more about humankind than life ever did. His estate, Dresk Manor, was a labyrinth of halls lined with polished skulls, cabinets of preserved insects, faded tapestries depicting plagues and ancient battles. Visitors described it as walking through a museum curated by a poet who had fallen in love with decay. Aramond kept journals filled with meticulous notes on every artifact, searching for the invisible threads that connected civilizations through their rituals of loss. He believed death held secrets, answers to questions no living scholar dared ask. So when a courier delivered a velvet-wrapped package to his door, a package with no sender name, Aramond felt the unmistakable thrill of discovery. Inside lay the diamond. He did not gasp. He did not cry out. He simply stared. The gem seemed to pulse like a living organ, each flicker of light a heartbeat. Aramond saw not a jewel, but a mystery crafted with impossible precision. He held it up to the lantern light, watching as reflections danced across the walls like ghostly silhouettes. "Magnificent," he whispered. He did not wonder who had sent it. He only wondered what it meant. He fetched one of his notebooks,
dipped his quill in ink, and began to write. At first, the diamond seemed dormant. Eramond studied it under different lights: moonlight, candlelight, dawnlight. He sketched every facet, measured every angle, compared it to known gem-cutting techniques. He consulted ancient texts, seeking mention of stones forged through ritual rather than geology. What troubled him was this: the diamond did not belong to any known category of mineral. Its clarity defied natural formation, its temperature never changed, and the symbols etched deep within it, visible only when held at a precise angle, matched no written script recorded in any culture. But Eramond was not frightened. He was enthralled. Each discovery tightened the bond between scholar and stone. He left meals untouched. Sleep became an inconvenience. Servants whispered that their master wandered the halls at night, murmuring to something unseen.
One morning, a maid found him sitting cross-legged on the library floor, staring into the gem as if mesmerized. "Lord Dresk?" she asked timidly. He did not look away. "It's speaking," he said. That was when the servants began to leave. Within 2 months, Dresk Manor had transformed. Curtains remained closed, plunging rooms into dusk. Candles burned at all hours. Eramond covered tables and floors with maps, scrolls, charts of migration patterns, diagrams of ancient burial rites. He pinned notes to walls, thick paper scrolled with ideas so frantic that his usual elegant handwriting dissolved into jagged slashes. The diamond rarely left his hand. Servants who remained in the manor spoke of strange occurrences. Objects moved without explanation. Doors opened to rooms no one remembered. Cold drafts blew from sealed corridors. Shadows twisted unnaturally when the diamond glowed. Worst of all were the whispers. Late at night, soft murmurs flowed down the halls, sometimes many voices, sometimes one. Words in languages no living scholar had ever heard. A few brave servants crept close, only to find Eramond kneeling on the floor, diamond cupped in his hands, eyes unfocused, as though he saw beyond the walls. "It shows me," he whispered. "It shows me the truth of every death it has ever touched." And indeed, a change came over him. He began to draw images he had never seen: burning temples, sinking ships, kings clutching their chests in betrayal, cities splitting open beneath their own weight. The drawings covered the manor walls like a mural of apocalypse. Eramond believed these were visions granted by the diamond, glimpses of the civilizations it had passed through. The truth was far darker. They were warnings, or curses, or both.
The more Eramond learned, the less he was able to comprehend. His journals grew erratic, some pages filled with coherent analysis, others filled with frantic repetitions. It feeds, it chooses, it devours what we build. It is not a stone, it is a memory of destruction. He stopped receiving guests. He stopped writing letters. He stopped answering knocks. Only the diamond occupied his mind. It whispered names of ancient kings, names of empires erased from maps, names of rituals forgotten by time. Eramond began to speak those names aloud, summoning echoes of civilizations whose ruins lay buried beneath deserts and seas. Then, one stormy night, he saw something no human should have seen. He looked into the diamond and saw himself reflected not once, but countless times, standing in the ruins of dozens of dead empires, their ashes swirling around him. Behind the reflections, a figure,
tall, forlorn, watching. Eramon screamed. The sound echoed through the manor halls until dawn. By morning, he could no longer speak coherently. His hands shook so violently that he could not hold the quill. He staggered through the manor like a ghost, clutching the gem as though it anchored him to the world. The servants fled that day. None returned. Alone, Eramond retreated into the deepest chamber of the manor, the ossuary room, where he kept his most sacred artifacts. Shelves of ancient remains surrounded him. Candles flickered against skulls centuries old. He placed the diamond on the central altar. "I understand now. You are not cursed. You are a witness." The candle flames dimmed. A witness to everything that ends. The diamond pulsed softly, as if acknowledging him. Eramon smiled through tears. He had finally found the answer he had sought all his life. Death was not merely a force. It was a record, an archive, and the diamond was its scribe.
But the truth he uncovered was too vast for mortal mind. As the candles died, a black wind filled the room, silent, cold, unnatural. Eramon's scream never left his throat. By dawn, the manor's heavy doors had burst open, and villagers found the ossuary room empty. Utterly empty. Every bone, every artifact, every journal, every trace of Emperor Adrast gone. The diamond, however, lay in the center of the floor, unchanged, waiting. A child from the village, curious, unaware, picked it up. The curse stirred once more. And it would soon pass into the hands of the modern world, where entire nations hungered for power. The child who found the diamond in the ruins of Dresk Manor did not keep it long. His parents, alarmed by the pale blue glow that seeped through the cloth he wrapped it in, hurried it to the village pastor. The pastor, in turn, sent it to a local historian. The historian mailed it to a university mineralogist. Each believed they were passing along a strange curiosity. Each felt a sense of relief when it left their possession. Each slept better the night it was gone. None realized the truth. The diamond had chosen to move on. And in a world more connected than any age before, it needed only a few hands to pass through before reaching the one place it had hungered for: the global market.
It arrived in the modern world like a spark dropped into a dry forest. The mineralogist at the university, Dr. Selina Marwick, examined it under microscopes, lasers, scanners. Each reading produced contradictions. Too light for its density. Too perfect for natural formation. Internal fractures that realigned themselves when viewed under different wavelengths. Selina wrote a paper suggesting the diamond had been artificially formed through ancient heat-based techniques. She submitted it to a prominent academic journal. 3 days later, representatives from a prestigious international auction house contacted her. They offered a sum so large she did not hesitate. She sold the diamond. It was said that when the crate containing the gem left her lab, the overhead lights flickered, and Selina felt, for the first time in weeks, free. But the freedom was not hers to enjoy. It belonged to the diamond. The auction house of Marrow and Finch stood at the heart of the modern metropolis of Harrowfort, a towering building of glass and steel, polished to a shine, its interior lit like a cathedral designed to worship wealth. The most priceless artifacts in the world had passed through its chambers: royal jewels, ancient manuscripts, lost masterpieces. But nothing, not even the rarest treasure, carried the presence that arrived with the diamond. It was catalogued as lot number 1988. Unclassified diamond relic, origin unknown. The specialist assigned to it, Amelia Rourke, was seasoned, meticulous, and unshakably rational. She had appraised cursed amulets, allegedly haunted weapons, even the shrunken remains of a long-extinct tribe. Yet when she opened the velvet case and first saw the diamond, she felt a chill move through her bones. It glowed faintly, without any light directed at it. When she touched it, her breath hitched. A sudden rush of images, flashes of burning cities, sinking ships, crowned skulls, burned across her mind. She dropped it. The diamond landed on the marble floor without so much as a scratch. Shaken, Amelia conducted the appraisal as quickly as possible and locked the gem in the high-security vault. But that night, as she tried to sleep, she dreamed of whispers echoing through empty hallways, calling her name. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand, a notification from the vault system. Motion detected. Amelia sat up, heart hammering. She accessed the security feed. The vault appeared empty. But the diamond no longer sat in its display case. It sat in the center of the floor, perfectly positioned, as though waiting. The feed flickered, went black, came back. The diamond had returned to the case. Amelia shut her laptop and refused to sleep the rest of the night. Word spread. Not officially, not through press, not through newsletters, not through legitimate channels, but through the whispered networks of the elite. Rumors whispered, a diamond beyond price, older than civilization itself, uncuttable, untestable, unnatural. By the night of the auction, the gathering in Morrow and Finch resembled a meeting of predators. A billionaire magnate with a reputation for buying artifacts linked to disasters. A museum director whose institution was on the brink of collapse. Representatives of 3 powerful governments. Criminal syndicates disguised behind polished lawyers. A private collector known only as the curator. And a handful of scholars who believed the gem belonged in a vault far deeper than the auctions. The auction house buzzed with tension. Security was doubled. Cameras monitored every corner. Snipers stood on the roof. Amelia Rourke watched the proceedings with dread coiled in her stomach. She had begged her supervisor to cancel the auction. She claimed the diamond was dangerous. Dangerous? He scoffed. It's a stone. But Amelia had seen the security logs, the strange electrical failures, the inexplicable shadows, the way staff suffered headaches, hallucinations, sudden tempers. She knew better. Yet she was powerless. The auction began. When the diamond appeared under the spotlight, resting on a silk cushion, the audience fell silent. Some gasped quietly. Some leaned forward. A few stepped back. Even through thick glass, the diamond's glow felt alive. The auctioneer cleared his throat, unaware that his pulse had quickened. "We begin bidding at 10 million. A number shouted. Another. Then a chain reaction. 20 million. 30. 45. 60. 72. The room heated with the frenzy of greed. Faces flushed. Hands shook. Breathing grew ragged. The diamond pulsed faintly, feeding. Amelia watched in horror as the bidding escalated beyond reason. She felt the air grow heavy, thick, almost electric, as though tension itself had become a living creature inside the room. Then the lights went out. A scream, a crash, silence. Emergency lights flickered on, and everyone froze. The diamond's glass case was open. The stone was gone. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed the stage. Guests shouted accusations. The auctioneer stumbled backward, pale as paper. Amelia scanned the room desperately. Who had taken it? Who had touched it? Then she saw him. A man, standing very still near the rear exit. Middle-aged, expensive suit, unremarkable face, but in his hand, barely visible in the dim light, something glowed. Her breath caught. The curator, a collector known for acquiring only one type of artifact, objects associated with death. He looked at Emilia and smiled. Before security could intercept him, he turned and vanished through the rear doors. The diamond pulsed in his hand as he slipped into the night. Minutes later, flames erupted from the electrical room. Smoke billowed through the vents. Alarms shrieked. Guests trampled one another trying to flee. Within 10 minutes, the entire building was engulfed in fire. Emilia barely escaped, coughing, eyes burning, her heart pounding. She watched from across the street as Marrow and Finch, a monument to wealth and greed, collapsed in a roar of fire. Dozens perished inside. The official report blamed faulty wiring. Emilia knew better. The diamond had consumed another nest of greed. And now, carried by one of the most dangerous collectors alive, it would move into the final chapter of its dark journey. A journey that would push the modern world to the brink. Because the curator was not just a collector. He was a believer. A man obsessed with the legends of the diamond, rumors of a ritual older than written history, a ritual that could awaken the true force within the stone, a ritual that could doom far more than empires.
The curator did not run. He walked calmly through the smoke-choked alley behind the burning auction house. The diamond clutched in his gloved hand, its cold glow illuminating the darkness like a captive star. Fire engines screamed down the boulevard. Sirens sliced the night. Panicked crowds poured from the collapsing building like ants fleeing a crushed nest. But the curator moved with serene purpose. He had waited decades for this moment. And the diamond, after centuries of wandering, after empires had burned and kings had fallen, had finally come to him. He entered a waiting black car. The driver did not speak. The curator slid into the back seat, staring at the gem with reverence and hunger. "It begins now," he whispered. The diamond pulsed once, softly, almost approvingly. Miles away, in a dim office filled with books and dust, Dr. Miriam Hale sat frozen before her computer screen. The news headline glared at her. Fire at Marrow and Finch, dozens dead, cursed diamond missing. Miriam pushed back from her desk, her pulse pounding. For 10 years she had studied the rumors, whispers of a gem that appeared in the ruins of shattered civilizations, always delivered by catastrophe. Most historians dismissed it as folklore, a myth woven from coincidences and superstition. But Miriam had seen too many patterns to ignore. Her research had tracked the diamond from the fall of Aranik to the collapse of Narezh, from the cursed merchant prince of Kal Tavar to the vanishing island in the southern seas. And now it had surfaced again, and dozens of people were dead. She grabbed her coat, her notes, and the old leather journal that had started everything, the final writings of Lord Emperor Adrast, smuggled out of his manor before it disappeared. On its last page, a single sentence: "The diamond is a prison. Break the prison, free the bound." She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But she intended to find out. The curator's home stood far from the city, an estate hidden behind iron gates and thick forest. Inside, glass cases lined every hallway, each containing relics dripping with history and ruin. Knives taken from crime scenes, arrowheads from massacres.
urns containing ashes from ancient plagues, death preserved. To him, these were not tragedies, they were lessons. But the diamond, oh, the diamond was something more, something holy. He carried it down a spiral staircase to the lowest chamber of his estate. There, beneath stone arches older than the house itself, stood an altar carved from volcanic rock, a slab shaped like a tear. Symbols etched across its surface glowed faintly, reacting to the diamond's presence. The curator trembled. "It's true," he whispered. "All the legends, all the blood, you are the last piece." He placed the diamond on the altar. The chamber quivered. A low hum filled the air, ancient, deep, resonant. The curator stepped back, breathless. He had dreamed of this moment for years. Every artifact he had collected, every ritual he had studied pointed to a single truth. The diamond was a seal built from suffering, bonded by sacrifice, meant to contain something older than every fallen empire. A god, a spirit, or a weapon. He didn't know. He didn't care. He only wanted to see it unleashed. It took Miriam Hale 3 days to track down the curator's estate. 3 days during which the world began to fracture, storms erupting without warning, earthquakes shaking cities, birds falling dead from the sky. She saw news clips of panicked anchors struggling to explain the strange disturbances. She knew the cause. The diamond had awakened. On the 4th night, she found the estate. It was eerily silent, the forest around it unnaturally still. She slipped through the gates, her heart hammering, and followed the faint tremors rumbling through the ground. The diamond's pulse guided her. Down the stairs, through the stone corridors, to the chamber.
And then she saw him, the curator, kneeling before the altar, his hands raised, his face streaked with tears. "It's almost ready," he whispered. "We will witness the rebirth of a forgotten god." Miriam stepped forward. "You don't understand what you're doing." The curator turned slowly, and she recoiled at what she saw. His eyes glowed, not with reflection, with radiance. The diamond had already begun consuming him. "It chose me," he murmured. "I will be remembered for bringing back the divine." "No," Miriam said, voice trembling. "You'll only bring another ruin." He laughed. The chamber lights flickered. The ground cracked. The symbols carved into the altar flared with blinding light. The diamond levitated and began to split. Miriam's breath froze. The diamond did not contain treasure or wisdom or prophecy. It contained a soul, a tortured ancient soul born from the ritual that killed a king long forgotten, forced into a vessel of crystal, imprisoned for millennia. Each tragedy the diamond caused was not random. It was deliberate. It was the soul's only way to weaken its prison. Every fallen empire had chipped away at the seal. Every death had fed its strength. Every collapse had cracked the cage. Now, with the curator's ritual, the prison was nearly undone. Light fractured across the chamber. The stone split into 3 pieces. A scream filled the air, raw, ancient, inhuman. The curator fell to his knees, laughing hysterically. "It's coming! A god born of suffering! A god—" Miriam grabbed a metal rod from the wall and swung it into the altar. Her strike knocked the diamond shards apart. The curator shrieked as the light flared wildly, losing cohesion. "No! You fool! You'll destroy it!" "That's the point," Miriam gasped. She swung again, and again, and again.
The chamber shook violently. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The light shrieked, a sound like burning wind, and the shards pulsed with frantic desperation. A vision slammed into Miriam's mind. Cities burning, oceans boiling, a figure rising from smoke, the world kneeling, endless death fueling rebirth. She screamed, but she kept swinging. On the 10th blow, the shards cracked. Light burst outward like a dying star. A roar, centuries of agony condensed into one final scream, tore through the chamber. Then, silence. The light faded. The hum vanished. The altar went dark. The shards lay still, empty. The curator collapsed unconscious, his eyes no longer glowing. Miriam fell to her knees, trembling, tears mixing with dust and sweat. She had broken the prison. She had freed the bound, and in doing so, she had ended the curse.
Days later, the world steadied. Storms ceased. Earthquakes dwindled. Animals returned to their normal patterns. Scientists would struggle to explain the anomalies that had rippled across the globe. Conspiracy theorists would whisper about forbidden rituals and attempted summoning. Museums would quietly inquire about the destroyed auction. The curator would face arrest for dozens of crimes. But Miriam Hale? She returned to her office, exhausted, scarred, and carrying a small evidence bag. Inside it, 3 shards of crystal. Not glowing, not humming, just quiet. She sealed them inside a lead-lined safe deep in the university archives. On the front of the safe, she placed a label. The Cursed Diamond. Do not study. Then she turned off the lights, locked her door, and walked away from history's darkest shadow. The shards remained still, silent, bound. For the first time in thousands of years, they held no hunger. And the world, unaware of how close it had come to collapse, spun quietly on. The diamond's story was finally over. Or so everyone believed. Because deep within one shard, just one, a faint pulse lingered. A heartbeat, weak, but growing, waiting. The curse was broken, not ended. And every ending is only the beginning of another legend.